Just me, a place to be me, where you get to experience life. 'Cause life is a journey, not a guided tour. If you want the rainbow, you have to go through the rain. Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us with this podcast. And this month, we're going to continue the conversation, or this episode, we're going to continue the conversation with about men and honoring our men, because Father's Day is in June, and we're just going to recognize some of the mental health awareness around men and their health. So we're going to get right back into this conversation about men and dating. So the first question is, with navigating through dating, especially during COVID and then post-COVID or post-pandemic, excuse me, how do you think, based on you guys' professional opinions, how do you think that navigating dating has been with men and also who experience unresolved trauma? So how do you navigate dating as a man with having unresolved trauma?
Are you asking how women deal with navigating dating with a man with unresolved trauma, or how a man navigates dating with his own unresolved trauma?
How women
Yes.
perceive that and how to help their spouse or their partner with the unresolved trauma. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Of course, having that suggestion of maybe therapy or possibly doing couples therapy could be a good segue into dealing with someone who has unresolved trauma, and definitely wanting them to get that trauma resolved so that they could be better off overall as a human being, not just as a partner, but a better human being. But there are a lot of things that block that, and it has to be the willingness for a man to want to open up, to divulge that sensitive place. And I find that men still have a hard time getting to that emotional state, allowing to be vulnerable enough to say, this is what is hurting me. And I don't maybe not know exactly, but this is around the place that I'm hurting. These are some of the actions that I see in my relationship. And this is guy talking, that my wife may do or my girlfriend may do that really takes me to another level because I saw my mom treat other men like this growing up. And I believe they still have a hard time expressing that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, Miss Shayla, how or what recommendations or nuggets could you give someone that is in a relationship and say that partner has verbalized that I have some unresolved childhood trauma. We're together, and every day is I feel like I'm walking on eggshells because I don't want to trigger him, but he tells me this. So how do I navigate still being in this relationship with a person that has it that refuses to get the help? How do I still continue to encourage him? Do I just live my life walking on eggshells? What can help me? What can assist me in dealing with my man who tells me he needs this, and I know that maybe like say talking to one of you would help, but I can't get them to that point, and I
Well,
don't myself in the process.
Well, one of the things is I definitely wouldn't recommend walking around on eggshells. You are entitled to be yourself at all times. And one thing is to continue to do that. Of course, continue to encourage him. But if it gets to that point where it is definitely a breaking point and you can't take it anymore and he can't take it more, you two have to now sit down and really make some decisions on how each one of you want to live your lives, because evidently you're not equally yoked in making that decision.
Mhm. And that's a good point that Shayla expressed, as it relates to really looking at what is going on and making decisions as it relates to what to do next. because no one should be in a situation where they're feeling very stressed to the point where they're not able to navigate in this space that they're living or residing in. So definitely decisions need to be made as it relates to what's next. And one thing I express to my consumers is that the only person that you can control is you. You can't control anyone else. So you provide the information. You have to definitely set boundaries because you have to protect yourself. And while you're setting boundaries, you still can offer resources as it relates to what can be done as it relates to receiving help. But once again, we can't control other people, but we can provide the resources for them to take the next step. But it's their decision to take the next step. But at the end of the day, you still have to take care of yourself. And when younger kids are involved, you really need to really think this thing out clearly because you don't want young children to see these types of behaviors and think it's okay.
Absolutely. So has anyone noticed any challenges that have arose specifically from dating um, a man or men dating a woman who has had unresolved trauma?
It's always a lot of insecurity, like trust. That shows up a lot when it comes to dating people with unresolved trauma because number one, they have a void or they have concerns with themselves. And what they usually do is they project those behaviors onto other people.
Yeah, and I will say that I've noticed that people with unresolved trauma seem to avoid vulnerable conversations. A lot of things are pretty surface level, which is why I think you had so many couples, even going back to pandemic, post pandemic, you have so many couples kind of like realizing, wow, I don't really know this person. Because for so long we avoided the real things because you had things that you didn't want to bring up and that you didn't really want to talk about, which is could be detrimental to a relationship.
Excuse me. I was gonna say, definitely denying that there may be some trauma, unresolved trauma. Um, Not realizing that some of these things are because it happened in your childhood. So it has to get to a point where you acknowledge that, okay, this may be the reason why I do this thing or I respond the way that I do.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know it was brought up in that last episode about like I said, just the word unresolved trauma from childhood trauma. And I know I often share a lot that even now, even though awareness is coming to mental health now since COVID, commercials, everything, money's putting in the government, school, everything, mental health push. But what about the generations before this push? So right now we have a society of grown people walking around with unresolved childhood trauma, and we're trying to figure it out. But we've raised up all of these kids, and again, I'm an adult with unresolved trauma. So now I have to come into the mix because it's been more aware now. I feel more comfortable because if you talk in the past, everybody looked at you, those myths like mental health is no good, is no good, something's really wrong with you. But now that the stigma is the sting of mental health is being pulled out of it, more people are coming forward. So how now with all of this, my spouse is traumatized. I want him help. But here too, I have unresolved trauma too. So when we come together and I'm dating, and again, we're talking about this dating scene and unresolved trauma. And I think Miss Sasha said it earlier about setting those boundaries when you run into it. I'm trying to get you help, you're trying to get me help, and we see that it's not going anywhere. Do we stay in this relationship or do we stop this dating? We just good friends.
You know, one of the things I think is important is that people take the opportunity to learn themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that so many people jump into relationships without taking that time to get to know who they are, especially if they've been in a previous long-term relationship, to get to know who they are and understand the reasons why maybe this relationship might have ended. Figuring out some things that you felt or some things that they felt, and really taking that time to unveil those things and get a better understanding of yourself. I have a lot of clients who jump into relationship, and it'll be like 3 months, and they say, they in another relationship is 6 months, maybe even a year, but people are so focused on not being alone that they're not taking the time to understand why they're going to really be alone. So I think that's just one of the issues, that people just jump from person to person versus taking the time to be alone, getting to know yourself, figuring out what these issues are, so that when you get the right person, it could be a long-term affair.
And I think that's what that saying, hurt people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hurt people. So you taking one trauma to another trauma, and then nothing gets resolved. So and that's the importance. So even from a woman's perspective, when we talk about men, that the importance of mental health, again, because hurt people. So if I'm dating and we're hurting, let's, like you said, get yourself good, your wellness when we go into the dating. And it's okay not to be okay. And then if you come across, don't try to make a circle fit into a square. It don't supposed to fit. And we push hard, and then we continue to be hurt. And then we raise children that hurt because they see us manage trauma wrong. Our response, it becomes theirs. So
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, for men and women, just being uncomfortable, like learning to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. Self-reflection. I encourage all my clients to do that and really know how to identify with themselves, what they like, what they don't like. What are your deal breakers, in your own life and your relationships? And it's not about like this checklist, so to speak, but really like being able to identify with yourself and knowing what you bring to a relationship, what kind of partner will complement you, and really, you can work together. And sometimes if that means taking a step back and kind of being alone instead of jumping from relationship to relationship, that's really what needs to happen. And I encourage men and women to do that for themselves.
And everything is not for everybody. Every person is not for everybody. It's okay that you don't match with another person. And it's okay that they're going through some things that they have to work out, and that may not involve you. Maybe they have to work it out on their own, and that is okay. So, yes, dating post-pandemic has been an eye-opener for a lot of singles. So definitely look forward to having other episodes with this, talking about this conversation. But thank you so much, my professional women, for sharing your insight. Again, Denise, Aaliyah, Jasmine, and Shayla, thank you so much for sharing your insight as it relates to dating men and their mental health and wellness. Until next time, take care of yourselves so that we can all take care of each other, guys. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Just Me Therapy podcast. If you are seeking further one-on-one diagnoses, interventions, and treatment plans, please consider scheduling an appointment with an individual counselor at Journeys Counseling Center, located in Greensboro, North Carolina. Journeys can be reached at 336-294-1349. The mission of Just Me Therapy podcast is to use authentic conversations to uplift one's mind, body, and soul. The goal of Just Me Therapy is to offer affordable education and insight to individuals who experience financial barriers to accessing individualized behavioral health care services. With that being said, the information, including opinions, advice, and recommendations discussed in this podcast are intended for individual, informational, and educational purposes only. Such information is not intended to substitute the recommendations of your own licensed therapist or healthcare professional. Although we are licensed behavioral health professionals, we are not your licensed behavioral health professional. As a result, the advice mentioned on this podcast should not replace the recommendations offered by your own qualified health professional.